Picture a British infantryman during the campaigns in France in 1940. Call him Private Adams, since the service record that might have named him hasn't survived, or was never kept in a form historians could find. What's documented is the weapon across his knees. 36 pounds of rifle, a muzzle brake the size of a fist, a 5-round box magazine sitting on top of the receiver like an afterthought. He's aiming at a German light tank, or maybe an armoured car, at a range of no more than 100 yards. He fires. On paper, the round in his rifle can punch through roughly 23 millimeters of armour at that distance. Enough, against the thin steel of 1940s lighter German vehicles, to matter. This is the moment the rifle was built for. It's also, more or less, the last moment it would matter in exactly this way. By 1941, German medium tanks were carrying 30 to 50 millimeters of frontal armour. For practical purposes, this rifle couldn't defeat them, except perhaps at extremely short range, against thinner side plates. British doctrine writers, ordnance officers, the men filling in war establishment tables, all of them knew it, or would know it within the year. And yet the weapon didn't disappear. In June 1941, official tables still listed 13 Boys anti-tank rifles on the strength of a standard infantry battalion. Tens of thousands more sat in factory ledgers, on order, in transit. Ammunition production continued for 2 more years. Large numbers went to the Home Guard. Others followed British and Commonwealth soldiers into the deserts of North Africa, the mountains of Italy, the jungles of the Pacific, years after the rifle had lost the one job it was built to do. The obvious explanation is that nobody got around to withdrawing it. The real explanation is less comfortable than that, and it says less about a rifle than about the institution that kept issuing it. To understand why, you have to go back to where the rifle came from and what it was built to answer. In late 1934, the British Small Arms Committee issued a requirement: a shoulder-fired rifle that a single infantryman could carry and fire, capable of stopping the kind of light tanks and armoured cars that dominated tank design in the mid-1930s. A year later, the General Staff turned that requirement into numbers. The weapon could weigh no more than 35 pounds. It had to penetrate 25 millimeters of armour at 200 yards and 14 millimeters at 500 yards, firing directly into the target's face. What the paperwork called normal attack. Those numbers were not arbitrary. They were sized to the tanks Britain expected to fight. Light, thin-skinned vehicles built for reconnaissance and infantry support, not the up-armoured mediums that would dominate the battlefields of 1941 and beyond. The specification was a snapshot of a threat picture, and threat pictures, unlike steel, do not stay still. The design work went to the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield, under a project that initially carried the codename Stanchion. The man leading it was Captain Henry C. Boys, Assistant Superintendent of Design at Enfield, and a sitting member of the very Small Arms Committee that had set the requirement in the first place. One of the people asking the question was also the one answering it. What Enfield produced was, by the standards of the requirement, a competent piece of engineering. A new cartridge, the 5.5 Boys, was built by necking out the American 50 Browning machine gun case to take a fatter 55 caliber bullet. The rifle itself was a bolt-action design fed from a 5-round detachable box magazine mounted on top of the receiver. To manage the recoil of firing a 1/2-inch caliber round from a man's shoulder, Enfield fitted a large multi-baffle muzzle brake, built a sliding recoiling section into the butt, padded the shoulder piece, and gave the whole thing a bipod or monopod for support. Even with all of that, it sat right at the ceiling the General Staff had set. 35 to 36 pounds, 5 feet 3 inches of rifle, for one man to carry, load, and fire alone. The rifle was approved for service on November 24, 1937, as the Rifle Anti-Tank 55-inch Boys Mark I. Captain Boys had died shortly before that approval came through. The weapon was named for him. It entered the British Army the same year, issued at platoon level as the infantry's own answer to armour, built, tested, and signed off against a threat that, by the time the ink was dry on the paperwork, was already starting to change. For a few years, the boys did what it had been built to do. British firing tables credited the improved Mark II armour-piercing round with roughly 23.2mm of penetration at 100 yards, dropping to 18.8mm at 500. Figures that, on paper, comfortably covered the 8 to 15mm of armour typical of pre-war light tanks and armoured cars. In France and Norway in 1940, it was the primary infantry anti-tank weapon British troops carried into contact with early German armour. In North Africa through 1940 and 1941, it proved genuinely effective against Italian light tanks and armoured cars. Later, in the Pacific, it would still carry enough penetration to trouble the thinner plate on Japanese tanks. None of this supports the idea, repeated often enough since to become a kind of folklore, that the Boys was worthless from the day it was issued. Against the threat it was designed for, it worked. The problem was that the threat it was designed for stopped being the threat that mattered. German tank design did not stand still to accommodate a British firing table written in 1935. Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks reaching the front in 1940 and 1941 carried frontal armour in the range of 30 to 50mm, beyond anything the rifle could put a round through, except perhaps at point-blank range against a thinner side plate, if the angle was forgiving and the crew's luck was worse than the gunners. By 1941 into 1942, the mathematics had simply stopped favouring the rifle. Against a Panzer III's front glacis, a round from it did not penetrate. It struck and stopped, and told the man behind the trigger nothing he wanted to hear. This is where the story gets misread, and it's worth being precise about how. Nobody had built the rifle badly, and nobody had lied about what it could do. The failure wasn't a flaw hiding inside the steel. Its 1935 specification had been honest about its own limits. 25mm at 200 yards, 14 at 500, at normal attack against the tanks of that decade. And the rifle met every line of it. What changed was not the rifle. What changed was the tank on the other end of the sights. Soldiers who fired a Boys at a Panzer IV's front plate in 1941 and watched the round fail to penetrate were not wrong to conclude the weapon was useless to them in that moment against that target. But that conclusion, generalized backwards into "the Boys never worked," erases the light tanks and armoured cars it did put out of action earlier in the war. An obsolete weapon and a worthless one are not the same claim, even though soldiers under fire had little patience for the distinction. And still the factories kept running. BSA alone manufactured 68,882 of these rifles during the war, a figure the company's own wartime production ledgers record. Estimates for total production across all marks and factories, British and Canadian, run higher still, into 6 figures by some counts, though sources disagree on the exact total. Kynoch and the Royal Ordnance Factory at Radway Green kept turning out 55 armour-piercing ammunition for the rifle into 1943, alongside additional Canadian production. An enormous amount of British industrial capacity had, by 1941, been sunk into building and feeding a rifle that, against emerging German medium tanks, could no longer do the one job it had been built for. That is the wound. A weapon that was honestly designed, honestly rated, and then quietly out-engineered by the enemy it was meant to stop, while the supply chain behind it kept moving at full speed, as though nothing had changed at all. So why did it stay? The flattering answer would be that the British Army kept issuing the Boys because someone, somewhere, still believed it could threaten a German medium tank in 1942. The record does not support that. Doctrine writers and ordnance officers understood the mathematics. The equipment reviews and tank studies from the period are not shy about saying so, in hindsight and at the time. It is not because the Boys still worked. It is because the British Army had nowhere else to put its infantry anti-tank hopes for the better part of 3 years, and had already committed enormous industrial weight to a weapon it could not yet replace. The timeline tells you why. The rifle was recognised as functionally obsolete against medium armour by 1941 into 1942. Its replacement, the PIAT, a shaped charge projector that did not depend on kinetic penetration and so was not beaten by thickening steel in the same way, did not reach combat units until 1943, arriving with Canadian troops in time for the invasion of Sicily and rolling out to British infantry battalions across that same year. That gap, roughly a year or more between the rifle being quietly written off as a tank killer and its replacement actually landing in a soldier's hands, is not a gap the army chose. It's a gap the army had to live inside, armed with what it already had. And what it already had was a great deal of these rifles and a great deal of 55 ammunition, and factories still configured to produce more of both. BSA's production run of nearly 69,000 rifles did not stop the moment the rifle was judged obsolete against German medium tanks. Kynoch and Radway Green kept 55 armor-piercing rounds coming off the line into 1943, well after the weapon's core purpose had already collapsed. Withdrawing the rifle immediately would have meant admitting that a substantial slice of the nation's wartime manufacturing effort had produced a weapon with an expiry date nobody had planned for. And it would have left infantry platoons without any dedicated platoon-level anti-tank rifle in their hands until the PIAT was ready. So the institution did what institutions in that position tend to do. It didn't scrap the boys. As the PIAT reached frontline British and Canadian battalions through 1943, the rifle got reassigned rather than melted down. One specialist estimate puts the number issued to the British Home Guard at around 100,000 rifles. Second-line troops who were generally not intended to be the ones engaging German medium tanks in open battle. Other rifles went to specialist units for a role that had nothing to do with tanks at all. The SAS and the Long Range Desert Group, operating in the Western Desert, used the boys against trucks, parked aircraft, and other soft targets, rather than tank armor it could no longer beat. The boys did not survive because it kept killing tanks. It survived because the British war machine had already spent the industrial capital to build tens of thousands of them, had no immediate replacement ready, and discovered that a weapon too weak for its original job could still be pointed at something else. The pattern did not end with the Home Guard. It simply kept finding new places to repeat itself, for years, across several armies. In Australia, the boys was already considered obsolete by European standards at the start of the war, and Australian forces kept using it anyway, against Japanese armoured vehicles, whose armour was thin enough that the rifle's ageing penetration figures still counted for something. Through 1944 and into 1945, long after British frontline infantry had moved on to the PIAT, Australian units were still finding tanks the rifle could actually hurt. Finland tells much the same story, from a different angle. Finnish forces acquired boys' rifles from Britain, designated them the 14mm anti-tank rifle, Model 37, and issued them at a rate of 4 per company from the Winter War through the early years of the Continuation War. Only around 1942 to 1943 did Finland's own Lahti L39 anti-tank rifle take over the role, meaning Finland too kept a weapon Britain had already begun writing off for years after that verdict was reached, simply because a domestic replacement was not yet ready. America's version of the same story is smaller, but it makes the point just as well. The Boys was the only anti-tank rifle to see actual combat use with American forces in the Second World War. Other foreign designs, like the Solothurn, were tested at places like Aberdeen Proving Ground, but never standardized. Its working life in American hands was short. The bazooka eclipsed it soon enough. But for a window, it was the only tool of its kind the US Army had actually fired in anger. Back home, the rifle kept finding niche work long after its main career had ended. Vickers medium machine gun teams, late in the war, are recorded as having access to it as an associated weapon, a supplemental tool for a crew that had other jobs to do. Some accounts describe scoped variants of the rifle, fitted with number 32 telescopic sights, used by specialist marksmen for long-range harassment of targets like mortar positions, rather than tanks. These accounts sit at the level of regimental anecdote rather than confirmed official record, and should be read that way. A separate, more folkloric claim that scoped rifles were issued to Royal Navy minesweepers to detonate floating mines by rifle fire, and stayed in that role into the late 1950s, has no Admiralty document or official naval equipment list behind it that anyone has yet found. It may be true. It may be exaggeration that hardened into legend the way old weapons often do. Either way, it says something that a rifle judged obsolete against tanks by 1942 was still, more than a decade later, the subject of stories about what else it might have been good for. By the time the war ended, the numbers told their own story. Tens of thousands of these rifles had been built. Many of them probably never fired at a tank in combat. And the weapon had, without ever being redesigned, quietly become at least 4 different tools: anti-tank rifle, home guard deterrent, anti-materiel weapon, and long-serving footnote in half a dozen other armies' inventories. Largely because replacements took time to design, produce, and field. None of this makes the Boys anti-tank rifle a scandal, or its designers fools. Captain Boys and the team at Enfield built exactly what the General Staff specification of 1935 asked for. And for a few years, against the tanks that specification described, it worked. The failure was not in the workshop. It was in the gap between how fast a threat picture changes and how slowly an institution can act on the knowledge that it has changed. Military institutions plan for the war they have studied, not the one that is coming. They write specifications against the enemy's current tanks, not the enemy's tanks 3 years from now. And once a specification becomes a rifle, and a rifle becomes 60 or 100,000 rifles sitting in ordnance depots, with ammunition factories still running behind them, the institution's honest assessment that the weapon is obsolete, and the institution's practical ability to remove it from service, become 2 very different things. The Boys was withdrawn from the job it could no longer do roughly as fast as a replacement could be built, tested, and shipped. Which is to say, not fast at all. The soldiers who found the Boys useless against a Panzer IV's front armour were right. The Home Guard units who received it afterwards, the Australian troops who kept killing lighter Japanese tanks with it years later, the SAS patrols pointing it at trucks instead of armour. They were also right, about a different weapon doing a different job with the same 36 pounds of steel. Both things were true at once, for years, because an institution rarely retires a weapon on the day it becomes obsolete. It retires it on the day something else is ready to take its place. And in the meantime, it finds the old weapon something else to point at. The Boys anti-tank rifle stopped being able to threaten contemporary German medium tanks years before the British Army stopped issuing it. That gap is the whole story. If you want more case files like this one, weapons that outlived their own purpose and the institutions that kept them in service anyway, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.